Because each of the presidential inaugural speeches was over 14 minutes long originally, and the excerpts for each speech in the book were substantially shorter, with Kennedy at 2 minutes 37 seconds and 2 minutes 18 seconds for Clinton's, I decided to watch both in their entirety in order to remind myself of the full context of the speeches. After all, context is king, right?
John F. Kennedy in Reunifying the Nation. Yes, Kennedy does speak to the reunifying of the nation after the long campaign against Richard Nixon, which was one of the closest elections in recent history. Kennedy starts off his speech with unification in mind. Quote, "We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom, symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change." This reunification call is echoed again in the first line from the excerpt. "In your hands, my fellow citizens, more than mine, will rest the final success or failure of our course." Kennedy calls the country to unity by reminding and reinforcing our common bonds as citizens. Rehearse traditional values. Kennedy does early on in the speech rehearse our united traditional values. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God, which sounded to me a lot like an echo to our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, which among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Kennedy here reminds the country that we all stand under the shadow of the same flag. This is a hard sell, considering the racial injustices and the equal rights movements that were going on at the time, struggles that were tearing the country apart and that still remain to be corrected. Again, Kennedy's call to tradition is echoed from the excerpt. "Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort?" Here again, Kennedy is calling to the people to join in this unification. He's building it on the traditional values that America has always held and stood for. Enacting the presidency. Kennedy starts off strong in enacting his presidency. "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge, and more." Again, he echoes the enactment of the presidency in the excerpt. "I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation." Interestingly, this is the only time in the speech where Kennedy used the personal pronoun "I" when referring to himself. Everywhere else in the speech, he uses us, we, me, my, mine. Kennedy also does not mention Congress or any other lawmaker in the speech. Setting forth guiding principles. Kennedy sets the tone and guiding principles of unity and dedication to freedom at the very beginning of the speech. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans, born in this country,
Bill Clinton, reunifying the nation. Clinton begins the reunifying of the nation with his very first line of his speech. My fellow citizens, today we celebrate the mystery of American renewal. This ceremony is held in the depth of winter, but by the words we speak and the faces we show the world, we force the spring, a spring reborn in the world's oldest democracy that brings forth the vision and courage to reinvent America. He again echoes the reunifying of the nation out of the excerpt. My fellow Americans, you too must play your part in our renewal. I challenge a new generation of young Americans to season of service, to act on your idealism by helping troubled children, keeping company with those in need, reconnecting our torn communities. Bill Clinton's calling for the reunification by things that will join us together, the helping of others. Rehearse traditional values. Clinton reminds the country of our traditional values in the excerpt. We rededicate ourselves to the very idea of America, an idea born in revolution and renewed through 2 centuries of challenge, an idea tempered by the knowledge that, but for fate, we, the fortunate and the unfortunate, might have been each other, an idea ennobled by the faith that our nation can summon from its myriad diversity the deepest measure of unity, an idea infused with the conviction that America's long, heroic journey must go forever forward. To me, this was the closest that Clinton comes in his speech to actually calling out traditional American values. And even this one seems kind of vague against what I would term traditional American values. I guess these are great human values, and America does hold to human values as our traditional values, and so helping of others. Enact the presidency. Clinton enacts the presidency. He starts out right away in the beginning. And so I say to all of you here, let us resolve to reform our politics so that power and privilege no longer shout down the voice of the people. He does so again in the paragraph right before the excerpt. The American people have summoned the change we celebrate today. You have raised your voices in an unmistakable chorus. You have cast your votes in historic numbers, and you have changed the face of Congress, the presidency, and the political process itself. Yes, you, my fellow Americans, have forced the spring. Now we must do the work the season demands. To that work I now turn with all the authority of my office. I ask the Congress to join with me, but no president, no Congress, no government can undertake this mission alone. My fellow Americans, you too must play your part in our renewal. So Clinton is calling for the Congress, to be a part of this. He's acting as the leader and asking the American people to support and follow him as he works with Congress to push forth these ideas that he's setting forth in earlier parts of his speech. Set forth guiding principles. Clinton's tone in setting forth guiding principles in his speech is one of change and of determination. Though our challenges are fearsome, so are our strengths. Americans have ever been restless, questing, hopeful people, and we must bring to our task today the vision and will of those who came before us. From our revolution to the Civil War, to the Great Depression, to the Civil Rights Movement, our people have always mustered the determination to construct from these crises the pillars of our history. He uses the term renew or renewal in reference to America 8 times during this speech. Change and renewal are very big in Clinton's inaugural address. He again makes the call for change right before the excerpt. Our hopes, our hearts, our hands are with those on every continent who are building democracy and freedom. Their cause is the American cause. The American people have summoned the change we celebrate today. You have raised your voices in an unmistakable chorus. You have cast your votes in historic numbers. So Clinton here, as setting forth his guiding principles, is really kind of tipping his hat back to America and says, you're the one who voted me in, and I'm going to do it. So change is on the way. For me, there really is no comparison between John F. Kennedy's inaugural speech and Bill Clinton's. I remember early on hearing John Kennedy's speech as he was giving it as a young boy. I remember wearing one of his pins, JFK and LBJ, many years ago. So to me, it's they're just different. The content of the speeches is completely different. The tone, the delivery, the philosophy, and the principles being laid down. To me, hands down, Kennedy's speeches is just really far superior in all ways, and kind of holds true to the building of the country on the country's founding principles. Kennedy's speech was very unifying for the country. We were going through quite a bit. Vietnam was escalating, and the civil rights movements were moving on. Social injustices were being revealed, and the process was in action for trying to get these injustices settled and taken care of and removed and corrected. Kennedy's speech really showed an authoritative figure, Kennedy, someone to lead us through those troubled times that were ahead. Kennedy's tone and persona while delivering the speech was really quite different from that of Clinton's. Kennedy's tone was sober. It was serious and very formal. He didn't smile at one time, or even look like he was going to smile throughout the entire speech. The speech was so powerful that it had to be paused 3 times during its delivery because of the applause. He really touched a note with the country, with the speech, and I do feel in my heart that John Kennedy's speech was just not to be compared with Bill Clinton's. It's just so much superior in my mind. Now, Bill Clinton's speech, as I had said on the Kennedy slide, I feel was just much inferior, and it was inferior in content. His delivery was not as strong. I not only read the speech, I watched the speech again today, and I was just reminded of watching that speech when he first came out. He was bouncing back and forth with the teleprompter and misspeaking and missing some of the words. So it wasn't as fluid to me, I guess, and in that way it wasn't as strong. I also felt that the content wasn't as strong. Bill Clinton's approach was one of the country's in trouble, and this is what we need to do. We need to change. We need to renew. We need to do this. And the country was in trouble when Kennedy took office. We'd come out of quite a few things, and with Vietnam going on, and peace, love, and understanding, and the social issues. Yet Kennedy's approach and appeal was, I felt, much more unifying, and he didn't say as much that he was going to change things as much as let's join together and do what we can to make the country a different place. I didn't really hear that in Bill's speech. It sounded more like Bill was trying to invent the country by changing the foundations on which we had been built, and it was just much more global in its presentation. And I'm not a big fan of Bill Clinton. I never have been, and maybe that kind of taints my observations. But I think looking back that he really did try to move us in a much more global position than we were in prior to his taking office. So now the question was asked if one speech was a ghost of the other, um, and I guess it kind of depends on what's meant by ghost. Uh, but in thinking that it just is kind of like a shell or a shadow of what the other is, which is probably how I would term a ghost. Um, I think that Bill Clinton's speech does attempt to be a ghost of Kennedy's speech. Um, and I remember vividly that how Clinton was during the campaign prior to the election being played off as the next JFK, the next John Kennedy. I have actually downloaded on my computer a couple of the commercials where they just actually put them, face to face and make those statements. Unfortunately, starting with his speech, he didn't even come close to being a ghost, even though I believe that the speech does tend to or attempt that. Again, his tone during the speech was less serious than Kennedy's was. And even though the issues that Bill was talking about are grave and serious issues, I just didn't feel that same sort of levity and weight that I get out of Kennedy's speech. Uh, Clinton's persona during the speech, he has a very casual look on his face. Of course, he's struggling at times with the teleprompter, but when he looked up at the audience, he just almost looked like he wanted to smile or to have that, famous Bill Clinton smile and at ease persona. But he didn't. He never did. He didn't smile and at all during the speech. There was a lighter feeling, though, at least when I watched it and listened to it, that I got out of the speech, and even reading it. I still felt that though the things were serious, there was just this lighter appeal to it. Different than Kennedy's speech was the fact that at no time or any point during the speech was there any applause. I just kind of found that odd. I don't know that I remember watching presidential inaugural speeches so many times in the past where there was one where there was no applause at all during that time. So I do think that Clinton's speech was an attempt to be a ghost or a shadow of Kennedy's, but at best it was a failed attempt. Now, if there was a ghost in one of these speeches, then Kennedy's was definitely the other. It was the one trying to be mimicked. And rightfully so. I mean, Kennedy's speech stands amongst one of the top speeches ever given. So kudos to Kennedy. Kennedy's speech follows very well the principles of rhetoric that the text talks about. I could kind of just go on down the four principles that were laid out in the book and find them. And like I said, I went from I did the entire speech just to keep everything in context, just for my mind. It's just kind of how I have to work. Again, Kennedy's speech was just perfect in tone for the time. It was there was celebration before the speech was given, and there was celebration after the speech was given. But when he stood at the podium, he was somber, serious, and very formal in his presentation. For those of us old enough to remember Camelot, which is what Jacqueline and JFK were considered as America's royalty almost. He was very dignified in his delivery of his speech, and it really shows whether you watch the black and white or the color versions that are out there. He had a very businesslike look on his face. He was serious but not stern. He was like a guy who had a job to do, and he was going to do it. Again, he didn't smile the whole time. I think the whole tone was just very fitting to the entire inaugural proceedings, and they're very well done. And again, it was received very, very well at the time. Like I'd mentioned earlier, the speech was actually paused 3 times during the speech because of the audience applause. So, yes, if there was a ghost, Kennedy's speech was definitely the other. Now, I wanted to take this last slide and just kind of just make some final comments about the 2 speeches that I found interesting when reading them both and watching them both, and then looking through each of them. And I kind of noticed some things about them, and they're not really things that are in the book, but there are things that caught my eye. It was interesting to me that both Bill and John's speeches were only different in length by 4 seconds. Kennedy's speech actually lasted 4 seconds longer. Both of them were almost exactly 14 minutes. And I found this really interesting because in Kennedy's speech, he only uses 1,387 words. But in Clinton's speech, he used 1,598 words. And so obviously Clinton said a lot more verbally, in the same amount of time. And I was thinking about how I felt watching Clinton's speech and the impact it had on it. And I think maybe that pacing, it just seemed different. Kennedy's speech is you could almost set a metronome to it if you're a musician. It has a tempo that's very good. Another thing I found interesting is that in Kennedy's speech, he only used the word America or American, one or two of the combinations. He only used it 7 times in the entire speech. I thought that was interesting because I don't feel like he had to use it. I mean, there was no doubt we were Americans. But it was interesting that in Bill Clinton's speech, he uses the term 33 times. So that got me looking at some other words, and I noticed that Kennedy used the word we, reference to we, 30 times, us 13 times. He used our 21 times. He only used the personal pronoun I 4 times. My he only used 3 times, and mine he only used once. And in Clinton's speech, he used we 52 times. He used us 13 times. He used our 57 times. He used I 7 times, and me 1 time, and my 7 times. So just different approaches that they each took, and the words they use. And I don't know, for me, some of my impact with Clinton's speech was I didn't feel like we were connected, like we were apart. But I remember even as a very young boy, during JFK's speech, having that feeling that, yes, I'm a part of him, I'm a part of this. And that could be because of his communication abilities, but maybe words had something to do with that too. Even though Kennedy used terms like we, us, and our far fewer times than Clinton did in his speech, I felt Kennedy spoke and gave the country more of a sense of unity in his speech than Clinton did in his. The same goes for words like I, me, my, and me, mine. With Clinton's speech, it sounded more like, get on board with me. And with Kennedy, it felt and sounded more like, let us join together. So again, in conclusion, I hold that Kennedy's speech was far superior. I think it communicated